the dog came with a story. Before General George S. Patton ever laid eyes on him, the animal had, according to the accounts that followed him for the rest of his life, already been to war. A white bull terrier riding in the cramped fuselage of a warplane somewhere over wartime England, curled against the boots of a Royal Air Force airman who was said to have taken his dog up with him. Then the airman was killed, and the dog, suddenly, was for sale. On March 4, 1944, in England, the most aggressive field commander the United States Army would produce in the Second World War paid to take that dog home. He thought he was buying a war hero. What he got was a coward. This is the story of Willie, the bull terrier who belonged to General Patton, or maybe it was the other way around. It's a story about a famous photograph almost everyone has seen and almost no one has understood. It's about a dog who was frightened of nearly everything, owned by a man who was frightened of nearly nothing. And it ends in a quiet room in December 1945 with an animal lying beside a dead man's luggage, refusing to move, waiting for Footlockers to open that never would again. Stay with it, because the dog tells you things about Patton that the man himself never said out loud. If you find these forgotten corners of the war worth your time, take a second to like this video and subscribe. And tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. It genuinely helps this channel more than you'd think. Start with the dog's first war, the one he had supposedly already fought before Patton ever entered the picture. The animal's name in that first life was reportedly Punch. He was an English bull terrier, that unmistakable breed with the egg-shaped skull, the small triangular eyes, the low-slung, heavily muscled body. And that body was not an accident. The bull terrier had been built a century earlier in the industrial cities of England for violence. Its ancestors were bred for bull baiting, and then, when that blood sport was outlawed, for the fighting pit. In the 1860s, a Birmingham breeder named James Hinks refined the all-white version that became a Victorian status symbol, a dog nicknamed, without irony, the White Cavalier. On paper, on pedigree, the most intimidating small animal a man could put on a leash. That was the creature that had belonged to a British flyer. Here the record gets soft, and honesty requires saying so plainly. The story that traveled with the dog, the one repeated in profiles of Patton for decades, held that the airman took the animal aloft with him, that Punch had ridden through the noise and the cold and the anti-aircraft fire over occupied Europe. How literally true that is, how many flights there were, whether they were real combat sorties or something a fond young pilot embroidered in the officer's mess, no one can now confirm. What is documented is the ending. The flyer did not come home from the war, and in the spring of 1944, the dog he left behind was put up for sale. What matters is what that story did. The dog arrived in Patton's life already wrapped in legend, a small, scarred veteran with a dead master and a reputation for combat. And that was exactly the kind of myth Patton collected. This was a man who believed, sincerely, in reincarnation. He believed he had been a soldier many times across many lives, that he had fought at Troy and marched with the legions of Rome and stood in Napoleon's armies. A battle dog orphaned by the sky, handed to him on the eve of the greatest invasion in history, would have felt to Patton less like a purchase than like fate. He paid. The dog was his. Now consider exactly when this happened. March 1944. Because Patton was in England, and Patton was in disgrace. The previous summer, in Sicily, he had walked into 2 field hospitals and struck 2 American soldiers who were suffering from what we would now call combat stress, cursing them as cowards in front of the staff. When the story broke, it nearly ended him. Eisenhower forced him to apologize and then benched him. And so, in the crucial months before D-Day, the finest offensive general the Allies had was not preparing to lead the assault. He was being used as a decoy. The Germans considered Patton the most dangerous commander in the Allied order of battle, so the Allies made him the figurehead of an army that did not exist. a phantom force of inflatable tanks and fake radio traffic in southeast England, designed to convince Hitler the blow would fall at Calais instead of Normandy. So picture the man, sidelined, humiliated, the best in the world at one specific thing and forbidden from doing it, reduced to a scarecrow in a field meant to fool the enemy. A man who defined his entire existence through action, with nothing to do but wait and hope the war would let him back in. That is the man who bought a dog. And even the name is disputed. The most repeated version says Patton christened him William the Conqueror, after the medieval warlord, a name to match that fighting pedigree. But the dog, it turned out, flinched at loud noises and shied away from bigger animals, and a conqueror's name sat ridiculously on him. So William the Conqueror got cut down. He became simply Willie. Other careful accounts say Patton actually named the dog after a boy he had once known, and that the whole William the Conqueror tale was romance stitched on afterward. Take whichever you like. They both tell you the same thing. The name shrank to fit the animal. Willie, not the Conqueror, just Willie. And here is the strange heart of the whole thing. Willie was a coward, there is no kinder word for it, and Patton himself did not reach for one. The general who told his men that Americans love a winner and will not tolerate a loser, the man with the ivory-gripped revolvers and the tank commander's swagger and the profanity that could strip paint, went back at the end of the day to a dog that cringed at gunfire, a dog that was afraid of other dogs. A dog that would slink under a chair and shake when the noise outside got bad. Patton knew it. He recorded it in his own diary and letters. The dog's timidity, its nerves, its stubborn refusal to be the beast its body had promised. And by every indication, he did not mind in the slightest. Sit with what that means. Everywhere else in Patton's world, fear was the unforgivable sin. He demanded hardness from his soldiers, from his officers, from his own body, constantly and sometimes cruelly. The scandal that had wrecked his career grew directly out of it, a man so incapable of tolerating fear in a soldier that he struck one for showing it. And yet the single creature he chose for company in the loneliest and most humiliating stretch of his life was an animal that was afraid of almost everything that moved. And Patton loved him for it, without condition, in a way he could never quite manage with a single frightened human being. The dog was the one place in the general's life where cowardice was allowed to live. And to understand why an animal could reach him where people could not, you have to understand that Patton had been an animal man his entire life. He was a cavalryman before he was a tank commander, commissioned into the horse cavalry, a lifelong and genuinely expert horseman who had grown up in the saddle in Southern California. In 1912, he had represented the United States at the Stockholm Olympics in the modern pentathlon, an event built around the skills of a cavalry officer: riding, fencing, running, swimming, and pistol shooting. He designed the Army's last cavalry sword, the blade still known today as the Patton saber. For a man like that, horses and dogs were not sentimental decorations. They were the oldest and most trusted language he spoke, a world of loyalty and nerve and physical courage that operated entirely without words, and without the political knives and bruised egos that filled his human life. A horse did not care about the slapping scandal. A dog did not read the newspapers. With animals, Patton was simply and uncomplicatedly at home. Willie walked straight into that lifelong soft spot and stayed there. Now picture the next 18 months from about knee height. You are a bull terrier, low to the ground, and your entire universe is made of boots and floorboards and the specific smell of the one man who owns you. In the summer of 1944, the long waiting finally ends. Patton is given command of the Third Army, and the whole roaring machine lurches across the Channel and into France. Your floor becomes the steel bed of a command vehicle, then the wooden boards of a requisitioned farmhouse, then the carpet of some chateau a staff officer has commandeered for headquarters. The man is gone for long stretches, and when he comes back, he smells of cordite and cold metal and cigarette smoke, and he lets you up onto the bed beside him. through the breakout from Normandy, across France at a speed that frightens the enemy's own mapmakers, into the frozen winter of the Ardennes, where the Third Army headquarters sits in Luxembourg City, and the man does the thing the history books will remember forever, wheeling an entire army 90 degrees through snow and ice to smash north and relieve the surrounded town of Bastogne. You are there for all of it, at floor level, in the warm spot near the stove, waiting for the door and the boots. You do not understand a single moment of the war. You understand only the man. And when the spring of 1945 comes and the guns finally go quiet, the man is still alive. And for a dog, that is the entire sum of the good news in the world. The war, Willie survived. It was the peace that killed his master. Denied the transfer to the Pacific that he desperately wanted, stuck in an occupation command he openly despised, Patton spent the autumn of 1945 doing the one thing he had always been worst at: nothing. On December 9, 1945, he set out for a morning of pheasant hunting near Mannheim, Germany. His staff car, moving at low speed, collided with an American Army truck at a railway crossing. It was, by every measure, a minor crash. Almost everyone in both vehicles simply climbed out and walked away. Patton didn't. He had been thrown forward at the moment of impact, and his neck was broken. He was paralyzed from the neck down. They rushed him to a hospital in Heidelberg, and for 12 days the most restless, violently energetic commander of the entire war lay in a bed, unable to move a muscle below his shoulders, while his wife flew across the Atlantic to reach him, and the doctors did everything they could, and none of it was enough. On December 21, 1945, a blood clot reached his heart and stopped it. The most aggressive general America produced in the Second World War did not fall to a bullet or a shell or an enemy who had earned him. He died in a hospital bed of the complications of a slow-speed car accident on a quiet road 7 months after the shooting stopped. 3 days later, on Christmas Eve, they buried him. At his own wish, Patton was not sent home to a hero's plot in Arlington. He was laid to rest in the Luxembourg American Cemetery at Hamm among the soldiers of his own Third Army, the men who had died in the snow around Bastogne the winter before. He wanted to lie with them. It was, in its way, the most Patton thing he ever did. Even in death he chose the front over the rear, the men over the monument. And somewhere in the house where he had been living, a dog knew none of this. There was no ceremony a dog could attend, no cemetery a dog could be brought to. There was only the sudden, total, unexplained absence of the one man in the world who mattered, and the luggage he had left behind. So the dog did the only thing a dog can do. He went to the belongings, and he waited for him to come back through the door. Which brings us, finally, to the photograph. If you have ever seen a single image of Willie, it is almost certainly this one, and it was taken in the days right after Patton died. A bare floor, a plain stretch of wall, and the dog, white, low, and completely alone, lying on the boards beside his master's belongings. The kit that had followed Patton across an entire continent, the packed cases, the footlockers, closed and going nowhere, holding the neatly folded remainder of a general's life. Willie is not looking at the camera. His head is down, resting on the floor, in the exact and unmistakable posture of an animal whose whole universe has walked out of the room and not come back. The image became one of the most reproduced photographs connected to Patton's death, and it accomplished something that no eulogy delivered at the funeral ever could. It made the loss small enough to actually hold in your hands. A 4-star general is an abstraction. A dog lying beside luggage that will never be unpacked is not. That is the image the title of this video promised you. The dog who had reportedly flown into war before he ever met Patton, waiting at the very end beside the footlockers of the man he had finally chosen. He did not know about Heidelberg. He did not know about the truck at the railway crossing, or the broken neck, or the 12 still days. He only knew that the cases meant the man had gone somewhere, and that the boots always came back through the door eventually, if you were patient, if you waited where the scent was strongest. So he lay down by the luggage. That was the plan. Wait where the smell of him was strongest. The boots did not come back. Here, at least, the record offers one small mercy. Willie was not left behind. When Patton's belongings were shipped home, the dog went with them, carried back across the same ocean to the family's home in the United States, to live out the rest of his life among the people who had loved the same man he had. He lived another 10 years. The timid white bull terrier who had been born to a British flyer, sold off the estate of a dead man, renamed downward from a Conqueror to a Willie, and carried through the entire liberation of Western Europe at the feet of George S. Patton died in 1955 in a quiet American house of nothing more dramatic than old age. He outlived his general by a full decade, which makes him, in a strange way, the longest surviving witness to the Private Patton. Not the one the newsreels captured, the pearl-handled pistols and the speeches and the fury, but the other one. The man who came home from the war he loved sat down on the floor with a frightened dog and asked absolutely nothing of him. If you served, or your father did, or your grandfather, and there was an animal that got adopted by a unit somewhere, a dog that rode in the vehicles and got fed by everyone and waited by the gear, that story belongs in the record too. Leave it in the comments. The best of them becomes a future file on this channel because this kind of history is too strange and too human to be allowed to stay buried. And if this one was worth your time, a like genuinely helps push it in front of the next person who ought to see it. But mostly, just remember the photograph. The general is gone. The tanks, the revolvers, the profanity, the terrifying speed of him, all of it stopped for good on a road near Mannheim. And on a bare floor, in the quiet afterward, a coward of a dog lay down beside a hero's luggage and waited for footlockers that were never going to open again. He was, without question, the bravest thing in that room. He just never knew it.